Hello everybody, today we're going to go over how to use the 3D layer in After Effects in a new way. We've experimented with 3D before, but today we're going to be talking about actually making 3D type that is extruded, and that'll make more sense in a second. So first off, let's make a new composition, and because this can actually eat up a lot of your computer's processing power, we're actually going to make our project a little bit smaller this time than usual. So for width and height, I'm going to do 1280 by 720. So usually we were going to HDTV 1080. This time you can change it up a little bit. So if you started off in your usual, HDTV 1080, that's usually what we did. This time, just change it. 1280 by 720. You're making it a little bit smaller, which is good because the computer will be able to handle the 3D a little bit better. And for the composition, let's go ahead and call this 3D type. And then let's go ahead and press OK. So again, 1280 by 720, we're making it a smaller window. Frame rate is still at 24. Duration, this can be short, 2 or 3 seconds would be fine because again, this is going to take a lot from your computer. So I'm going to leave it at 2 seconds and I'm going to press OK. Now the first thing that we're going to do, like we've done before, is let's just go ahead and make a new solid as our background. And for now, I'm just going to pick a light color. So I'm going to go with like a kind of like a light purple. And this is going to be my background layer, and I'm just going to lock it. I'll leave this one alone for a while. The next thing I'm going to do is going to grab the type tool, and I'm going to go ahead and grab my type tool. Remember that you can control the options on the right hand side where it says character to adjust the color and everything else that you might need, and find your favorite font. And I'm going to click once here, and I'm just going to type the word 3D type. Some of you might want to experiment with your name or a brand name or whatever it is that you want to do. I'm going to grab my move tool, and I'm going to make sure that I center this before I move on to anything else. So remember, we have the shortcut of Command Option Home to put the center point in the center. We can also, if you don't have Home on your keyboard, you can right-click, Transform, Center Anchor Point in Layer Content. Okay, so everything is centered. I'm going to use my font size here. If I want to make it a little bigger or smaller, I can adjust it. If I want to change the color, I can do that as well. I would recommend that you pick a bright color, not black. Pretty much anything but black, or don't choose any dark colors because it's going to be harder to see the 3D in a second. And then I'm going to go to Align, and I'm going to make sure I align this right there to the center of the canvas. So far so good. So again, just a solid background, and then we made a type layer. Now this is where we're going to do something different than we've done before, and this is also where your computer might have trouble doing this. So this is something you're going to have to experiment with, because again, this kind of 3D that we're about to do does take a lot of processing power from your computer. Those of you with fast computers, you shouldn't have any problem. Those of you that do have a slower computer, you might actually not be able to do this project, which is totally okay. And I'm giving you other options for you to do instead. So what we're going to do next is where it says 3D type, we're going to click on the little 3D icon like we've always done. As we've known before, this 3D icon lets us move the object in 3D. It lets us spin it. It turns it into a flat plane in a 3D space. The thing that we're going to do different now is in the top of the screen where it says renderer, we're going to choose it. Usually it's on classic 3D. We're going to now change it to Cinema 4D. And the reason we're changing it from classic to Cinema 4D is because Cinema 4D allows us to do extrusions and bevels. And that's pretty much what we're going to experiment with today, extruding and bevel. So again, you're going to click up in the top right corner. Most likely yours is set to classic 3D right now. You're going to change that. You're going to change it to Cinema 4D. So you're changing the rendering options, and you're going to press OK. You can also find this if you don't see this little button in the top right corner. If you go to your composition settings, usually we've only been looking at basic, but if you click on advanced and then 3D renderer, this is where you get to choose the 3D renderer that your computer is going to use. And in this case, we're going to Cinema 4D. Okay, so why did we do that? Well, the reason we did that is because now we'll be able to add extrusions. So now that we turn on the 3D icon, now that we have it set to render Cinema 4D, if you open up your type layer, you're going to find, if you open up the geometry options, you're going to get this new option that's called Extrusion Depth. Now go ahead and increase that number. As you increase that number, you'll see your type grow in 3D. Now, when you first do it, you might not really see the 3D because it's all the same color. So what we can do is we can introduce a light so that we can see the sides. So I'm going to bump up my extrusion depth to 200. Now before I move on, let's just take a look at what I really did here. If I changed my active camera to custom view number 1, you'll notice that the type definitely has grown. It's just hard to see the sides. There's no shading. So I'm going to go back to active camera. To see the shading, let's go ahead and we can lock these layers for a second. And let's introduce a new layer. We're going to introduce a light layer. We're going to right click in our empty space and go to New, Light. Or of course you could go up to Layer, New, Light. Either way. Layer, New, Light. And then you get a whole bunch of options for lights. Now the easiest one, and probably the one that I think you'll have the kind of the best time with, because you get 4 different lights. And we'll talk about them in a second, but let's just go with the easy one, which is going to be the spotlight. You can leave the settings as they are for now, and just go ahead and press OK. Now when you add the spotlight, what's going to happen is you're now going to see a light that's shining on your 3D object, and you're now going to be able to see the sides of your object because there's a light in the world, and that's giving you shading. Again, let's change this view now to custom view number 1, and we can see what's happening with our shine. So I'm going to go back to active camera. Now, if I want this to shine a little bit better, I'm going to have to adjust the light. So I'm going to open up Spotlight, and I'm going to open up its light options. And if I go in here to the light options, I can start messing around with some of the options. One of them could be cone angle. If you increase your cone angle, the light will shine a little bit wider on the scene, right? So you can move this around now. Now this is where you want to have fun with this and experiment. I'm adjusting the cone angle to make it go bigger. But let's say I left it at, let's just do a random number, 120 for example. I could now bump up the intensity and make the light brighter, right? So I did a bump of 120 to the cone angle, and I did intensity. Let's make it 210. And I think that looks pretty cool. I can see my 3D type, and I like the way that it's looking. Now, the one thing that you want to experiment with is the different lights that you can use, because there are many different lights. Now, this was the spotlight, and the spotlight shines the light on an area, kind of like a spotlight would on a stage. So if you've ever seen a stage when the light is shining on the stage, it's kind of like shining down. It's a spotlight. It focuses its energy on one place. I'm going to try a couple other lights. I'm going to turn off that light just so you can see them. If I go to New Light, and let's now try Parallel. And again, some of these, I don't think they're as effective as Spotlight's pretty good and works pretty fast. And you don't have to mess around with it too much. Let's go to Parallel, and let's try a Parallel light. Parallel light also looks pretty good. Also shines everything. Doesn't give me that soft shading, but it definitely allows me to see the edges that are nice and dark. So that's Parallel light. If you open that up, again, you're going to get tons of options here. You can increase the intensity like we did before and make it brighter. You can see in this case, it's not really doing too much when I adjust the brightness. So I kind of just like the Parallel light just on. Kind of works. It's not as soft as the other light. Again, feel free to experiment with all the other details here. I'm going to turn off Parallel light. So we've tried 2 different lights. Let's try another one. New Light. And this one let's try, since we already did parallel and spot, let's try point. Point light, you're going to get that same kind of softness that you got from before. If you look at this from the custom view, you'll notice that this light doesn't really have that much of a cone. This light is more like a light bulb that's in a room. So it's just emanating light all around it. Again, open up point light, adjust some of the settings in here. If you go into your light option settings, play around with this stuff. Increase the intensity, mess around. Again, intensity is probably what I'm going to keep it to. I'm going to keep it simple because, again, if I mess with a lot of these options, sometimes my computer can get kind of slow. And I'm going to do another one, new light, and we'll try the last of the lights, ambient. So the ambient light, it lights the overall scene. So with ambient light, it might be a little bit hard to actually see the shadows. So ambient light's probably not going to be the one that I want just yet. Ambient light, again, lights the whole thing. So like you'll see, it allows me to lighten or darken the whole room, but it doesn't really bring in the shadows as much as I'd like. So those are just some ideas for our light. Now I'm going to turn them all back off, okay? I think my favorite, and I'm just going to go through them again, spotlight was pretty cool. I like how it looks soft on the edges. Parallel light, it was simple. It added really dark shadows. Point light, kind of similar to spotlight, and you can go back and forth and test them. Which one do you like better? You can also combine them. You can turn on all the lights. Now as you do this, you got to be careful because it might slow down your computer as well. Once we start heading into 3D, we literally have to consider our machine because our machine's going to have to think a lot about this. So again, try out the different lights, see which one you like the best. I'm kind of liking spotlight. I think it's pretty cool. Now let's talk about a couple other adjustments we can make here. One of the other things you might want to do to your type, so I'm going to go back now, I'm going to lock my light layer, I'm going to open up my 3D type layer. One of the things you might also want to do, and I'm going to adjust the bevel style. Now this adjusts the edging of your letters. Now if you look closely, and if we zoom in here, as I adjust the bevel style, it changes the edging of the letters. So you can play around with the bevel style, and as you play around with the bevel style, you also want to increase or change the bevel depth. And you're going to see you get some really different adjustments. Bevels are like the side cuts on the top of the letters, as if they had an edge. So you can adjust the edging. So again, experiment with that. Convex is kind of cool. It makes everything look pretty round, which is kind of nice for now. I might just leave it there. Again, adding all these things, again, be mindful of what it's going to do to your computer processing power. And again, you can adjust the bevel depth. You can adjust the extrusion depth. You can mess around with all those settings. And the whole bevel depth, if you slide this one, it's actually going to change the settings for letters that have holes in them. Cool, so bevel depth, and remember extrusion depth was the deepness. How deep is the letter going into the background, right? So you can increase that extrusion depth. Now again, do we like bevel style? Maybe not. I kind of liked it when it was cleaner and simple, but sometimes I might want to mess around with this a little bit. Another couple things that we can do to the type is if we go to the 3D type layer and we go to the little button that says animate and we go to where it says side, we can now also change the side colors because you might want to have a different color instead of just shaded yellow. So if you go to side, color, and you introduce RGB, you can actually change the color of the side. So right now it's set to red. What if I wanted to do blue? Whatever you want to do. Actually, I think red was looking pretty cool, so I'm just going to leave it on red. So again, how did I get there? I went to the 3D type, I went to animate, and I went to side, and then I went to color. So there's a couple options that we can mess with. One last thing we might want to do is go back to, and let's go ahead and lock our light and lock our 3D type layer. If we turn on our solid layer, we might also want to introduce the 3D option to the solid, to the background. Now, you'll notice when I did this, everything disappeared. Some of you can probably already guess what happened. What happened is when I turned on the 3D layer for my background, if I look at custom view, my background is now in front of my type. So I would need to adjust it by going to transform and moving its position, right? Aha, so if I move its position of the background layer, I can go as far back as you want. You can go all the way back behind your type. This is where you could do some cool effects where you could adjust the background as it you know, it could move back and forth and stuff. You could do some cool things with that. But I'm going to put it pretty far back. And then now I'm going to go take a look back at active camera, right? Now my background is still there. It's just not big enough now because when I made it 3D, it got smaller as I pushed it back. So I probably want to bump up the scale and make my background really big, right? Now, why did I do that? I did that because it was kind of cool to see the background being lit by the 3D as well. So that's something for you to consider. You can play around with this option. Now, as you go into that background layer, you can also open up its material options and you can play around with the settings. For example, if I lower the metal to 0, it gets even brighter. If I lower the diffusion, it also changes the way the light accepts it. So you want to experiment with this stuff because there's a lot that you can do here. But now what we've got is we've got a lit background, we've got the 3D type, and we've got a light layer on top. Now let's just do, again, I'm going to lock this background layer. Let's do an adjustment here to our type. How about if we just make it move or something like this? So for example, we'd now go to transform. Let's say we wanted it to move from top to bottom. We can just do our typical keyframe stuff that we know. So position. In the beginning, let's say I want the position to be, I want it to come from left to right. So I'm going to keep dragging it. And then let's say at 1 second, I want it to come right into the middle of the screen here. And my values, I'm just kind of eyeballing it for now. Right, so I just did an animation where the 3D type went from left to right on the screen. And again, this might make your computer freak out. I'm using a pretty fast iMac, and it's obviously taking its time. I have an older laptop where if I try to do this, it just won't work. So if it's not working on your computer, it probably has to do with the processing speed, the video card, and the way that those two things work together. So don't worry if it's not working for you because it's a challenge. It's just 3D takes a lot of power from your computer. But hopefully everybody, that makes sense. What I'd like you to do with this information, for those of you that can do it, is experiment. What I'd like you to do is experiment with 3D type, lights, and backgrounds. Now, obviously, you can bring in images in your background. You can type cool stuff. You can find a really awesome font. I just did a really simple thing for you, but this should really get you going. I'll have notes on the blog so that you can follow along with that too. And I hope you're doing great. See you soon.